So they bring out Nina Jankowicz. Who is she and what does she want? That was sort of irrelevant to whoever appointed her, because she apparently had been really successful at marketing herself and networking behind the scenes. I mean, it would be really funny to know how she wound up getting this job.
Well, she was a vocal supporter of Biden as well, in particular when he fired the prosecutor in Ukraine. She defended him on that, saying that was diplomacy. Right. And I mean, she's really towed the line for the Democratic Party, over the last several years.
I listened to the bombshell recordings about Joe Biden released by an untrustworthy Ukrainian lawmaker today, so you don't have to. And here's what they say. Nothing. The recordings corroborate what we already knew. Number one, Joe Biden, as Vice President of the United States, was the Obama administration's chief emissary to Ukraine, and as a high-ranking U.S. official, often spoke on behalf of the international community. Number two, the international community, not to mention Ukrainians, thought that Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin was a detriment to, not a champion of, justice and reform in Ukraine. And number three, as a result, the vice president delivered a message that Shokin needed to be fired and other reforms pursued if Ukraine wanted its next tranche of IMF funds and a U.S. loan guarantee. This is called diplomacy, not extortion. That's it. Now you can get back to your Netflix and your Zoom happy hours and lots of washing your hands.
Yeah, I mean, she's younger than me, but she's managed to emerge as kind of an influential attack dog for the Democratic Party and defender. And she's helped them refine this language of disinformation, but she's also, as we can see, a complete and total clown who's extremely reckless. Let's just go through her history really quickly. She, I think, was in Ukraine advising the government on a Fulbright scholarship, which really highlights how neoliberal this government is and how similar it is to the post-1973 government of Chile, where basically all of its opponents are disappeared, tortured, assassinated, and U.S. advisors are brought in to ram through austerity policies and to Americanize and colonize Ukraine. She was sort of riding that gravy train, getting experience there. Then she gets a fellowship at the Wilson Center, which is a U.S. government funded, they call it a public policy center in Washington, D.C. It's a think tank that tends to trend democratic. And she was also working at the National Democratic Institute, which is a subsidiary of the National Endowment for Democracy, the regime change arm of the US government. The NDI was headed for decades by Madeleine Albright, and they would come in and train activists and civil society figures to advance regime change operations from Libya to Tunisia to Venezuela. So she was involved there. And she is a regime change fanatic, which led her to really take an antagonistic line towards the Grayzone, the news outlet. And I've found it. I mean, I take it as a badge of honor that she was attacking us. But if you look at the attacks on us, she is falsely branding us as part of a Russian disinformation operation. I mean, she's so desperate to censor us. She's so desperate. And she called us dangerous disinformation or damaging disinformation, which makes me feel good. I mean, I'm glad that we're damaging her cause, which is to spread imperialism and topple elected governments around the world that don't align with the imperial agenda. I take that as a compliment, but it also shows that someone who wants to censor us, who wants to eliminate us, essentially, who's libeling us as part of a Russian disinformation operation, has now been appointed with law enforcement powers at an agency that was created out of the post 9/11 war on terror hysteria to crack down on terrorism. And that is outrageous. And it needs to be shut down. It needs to be investigated. We need to know what they're spending their money on. There's no transparency. And anything,
I was going to say too, I mean, it seems inherently unconstitutional, right? Like it seems as though it's a government agency designed to violate the First Amendment. So how do they even get away with creating it?
I mean, there's just this culture among liberals and in liberal media, including at outlets I used to write for, like the Daily Beast. I wrote for them for like a year, where journalists, their job is essentially to go after those who are spreading disinformation and to demand that the manager in big tech shut them down. That's just what journalists do these days. It's amazing. I mean, there's an entire field that's been created for journalists to do this. And so it's considered legitimate. Censorship is considered legitimate in this fight against disinformation, because information is not only seen by people like Nina Jankowicz as a weapon that can be used to undermine US national security, but speech itself, if left unregulated and unsuppressed, is seen by left liberals like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, someone who presumably would have stood up against the anti-rap censorship campaigns of the 80s and 90s, as a gateway to an explosion of hate crimes. AOC said this several days ago, that if Elon Musk takes over Twitter and allows, and skews Twitter, what she's saying is he doesn't censor as much, there will be an explosion of hate crimes. There's no evidence for that whatsoever, but it shows you how everyone from the center right of Mitt Romney to the kind of rad lib left of AOC views speech, the speech of the American people, the American populace, unrestricted, as potentially violent, dangerous, and existentially destructive to the United States.